Hi, and welcome back to the White Noise podcast. Today, because it's the end of February and obviously it's a very romantic month, and we are romantically inclined people, we decided to lean into that theme, and we're going to be talking about something me and Skye are both very passionate about, which is fan fiction. So, Skye, if you want to go ahead.
So me and Lyanna have been friends for a really long time, but we had like a whole period in our friendship where like we mostly just hung around with the same people more than being friends with each other. So at the time when we both would have been reading fanfic and like our fanfic heydays, we didn't really communicate about it. So it's so weird to talk about it now, like, I don't know, nearly like a decade later from when we first started reading it, and like have the different experiences with it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like you mentioned just before we started recording this episode, it's such an intimate experience that, you know, the kind of fanfic you like, it's not the same as the books you like. You read fanfic because you're so intensely interested in a certain, you know, story or certain characters that you don't necessarily share fanfic with people in your day-to-day life. You share it with like the online community. And I think, yeah, that's why we've only started talking about it recently, because we talk about fan fiction as a thing rather than the exact fan fictions that we were into at the time.
Fanfic has this thing where, in all honesty, this is like one of our first episodes that I feel like, unless you were part of the fanfic, I don't even say era because it's definitely still going, but like the 2000s, 2010s era of fanfic,
like the heyday.
You're gonna click off this episode because you're gonna think, oh, it's weird, or why are you talking about it? But it's like, if you're here, you get it. Because I think, like Lyanna said, it's really hard to explain kind of that particular feeling. But with like fanfic in general, like there is that intimacy with it, but then there's also the community side of it, which are two things we're really going to talk about in this episode today, because it was great to have like that, oh, this weirdly kind of feels like mine, and then have that whole idea of a lot of people were reading this but not talking to each other about it. Like everyone would have like pseudonyms online and leave kudos and comments, and like it was almost like you could be a part of a community without having to like expose yourself.
Yeah, it was very anonymous, wasn't it?
Yeah, not
very
that it had
much
to be. And I think unfortunately that's why it became such kind of like a shameful thing. Not that it should have been, but I know we've both experienced this, hence why we didn't even talk about it with each other at the time. But like because of that anonymousness you could have with it, yeah, there was like a huge shame attached to it. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to do this episode today is because we're both in like our mid-20s now, or at least getting there, and we're just fed up. We're just like, you know what, we liked this shit. It really helped us during really dark times. It helped us find different kinds of communities. Yes, we acknowledge the problems with some of it, which we'll get into a bit later. But it was something that I think a lot of people are realizing now, that it wasn't this big shame that you should have had.
I think a massive part of that is, like you say, people are anonymous, and that doesn't help. That obviously adds to stigma, because if people are embarrassed to reveal their names, then it makes people believe there is a reason to be embarrassed. But I think before that, we have to think about the fact that a lot of fanfic is very sexual in its nature. So I just want to preface this entire conversation by saying that there's probably going to be some topics in this episode which might be a little bit heavy. I can't say for sure what we're going to dive into just yet, because we want quite a natural conversation today. But if any of you are familiar with fanfiction at all, you know, sometimes it can dive into quite mature content matter, which it probably shouldn't have done considering its audience base. And that can take you into the conversation of who was writing this. And this is something me and Skye are fascinated by. Are the problems with fanfic that they've written by people too young? Or is the problem that the people reading it were too young and the people writing it were too old? And this was the problem with the anonymity of fan fiction, is you didn't know who the person writing this was. Like, you didn't know how old they were, you didn't know their orientation. That becomes a whole thing within fan fiction. You don't know anything about it, and it's funny because, like Skye said, it's so important to so many people, and it has been to me in times of my life, but there are so many problems with it.
Do you know what's funny though? Like, you just bringing up that whole, you know, obviously wanting to warn people about stuff we may or may not be talking about. Fanfiction was actually the first time I ever saw like trigger warnings.
Really?
Like, I also understand like the term trigger warning isn't exactly correct, and I know that a lot of people don't like it, but just say warnings in general.
Yeah.
have become a lot more important now. I mean, they were always important, but I mean, people are realizing their importance and why you need to have them in shows and films and any kind of media. But I think fanfic for me was the first time I really saw them. And I think that was another reason why even like those kind of warnings got a bad stigma, because they had that association to that kind of content.
And that kind of audience of like teenagers.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that just goes into the whole idea of, again, how like pinnacle fan fiction was and still is, because it like, I'm not saying that fanfic was the reason we have these warnings, but like they were doing it way back when, they were a lot of the fanfics had really, really problematic stuff in, so they really needed them. But it was the first time I ever saw them.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me because while it's a great thing that they set a precedent and, you know, they made it important to include and normalized it, it's also like, should they have been including the stuff in those fanfics that required those warnings?
Yeah,
it's a debate, isn't it? But I just want to say we're going to dive into this, but before we get super deep into things, I think maybe we should start by talking a little bit about our biggest fan fiction, like the one that really got us into it, or the one we still revisit to this day.
The fanfic.
Yeah, pretty much.
No other
one.
Everyone has one. Yeah. So do you want to go first?
Well, so mine's
tricky.
Mine's a bit infamous among my friends because so I was super into Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire specifically, because no matter what I've ever been into, I've very much been a lore person. So even if the actual text or show or whatever it is not that interesting, if there's good lore, I'm into it. I will spend nights and nights and nights on Wiki. So of course, A Song of Ice and Fire was my shit. I would say from the ages like 16 to 18. And it's embarrassing to say, but I got very much into Arya and Gendry. And obviously
it's not, hold on, I'm going to stop you there. It's not embarrassing to say, we're not doing this here.
No, hear me out. No, because this is what I'm going to dive into, because there are many things I don't think are embarrassing, but this one actually is. I agree with you though. I believe like don't shame people. But anyway, the thing with Arya and Gendry is there was an age difference. And when you're younger, you don't think about it as much, and you also, through the lens of this content, you're thinking it's based in a different era, it's a medieval fantasy world. And some fan fiction, like, and I mean I consumed everything to do with them, like AU, everything, honestly, and it was always there, but sometimes they would shrink it to kind of make it more palatable. That was kind of stuff I read. I didn't really get into the stuff that was like their real age difference, because when you actually go back and read A Song of Ice and Fire, it is big. And it is like a bit concerning. And some fanfic, they would like talk about the era in Game of Thrones when Arya is first sent off and she's quite young and Gendry's like a teenager and stuff. And it was like weird. I was never into that. I just want to say that. But essentially, it was a big thing for me. I was really into it. All my friends know, they thought it was quite funny because of how much I was into it. I would sit on breaks in college reading fanfic. That was our thing, wasn't it, Skye? Like,
I was going to say, I also just want to say quickly that, like, even though we didn't really share our like fanfics with each other, we were both aware that we were reading them. Yes, and exactly. I fucking loved how committed you were to this. Yeah. I loved how it was like a joke. Like, not like a joke at your expense. It was a joke you were in on. But I loved how it was a joke about like,
it was all I read.
Like, to a point where like I was like convinced that you had written it at one point.
No, honestly, I remember my sister was like, Lyanna, just start writing it. I'm like, no, like, don't get me wrong, I get the appeal, but like I like consuming it. You know, there's some stuff you want to write, some stuff you want to consume. But the thing is, like, still to this day, I think them bitches were good writers, honestly. Like, some of the people writing this stuff, and I have seen people say that in the comments of some of the fics I read, is that there's something about that particular pairing which actually attracted some really good writers. So, and you can find that in a lot of fandoms where, like, you know, certain pairings will have like really bad writing for the most part, some will have really good, and you can't really explain it, it just happens. But anyway, this particular pairing I got so into because there was some genuinely really good writing that kind of like really fleshed out the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. And I eventually stumbled across this one, and it's infamous because I read it like nobody's business. And I read it, I swear to God, every year. Like, Skye, you even know this. I'll send that message every single year, like, I'm due a read. And I'm not even joking. I end up doing it. And I read it in a night. I don't think there's another thing I've ever read that quick. And this is not a small fic. This is like,
does it have a name? Like, does the fic have a...
It's called No Feather Bed for Me. So people are familiar. It's like infamous in like the Arya Gendry area. And some people don't like it because they think it mischaracterizes people. But at the end of the day, it's all up for interpretation. They're not trying to write another, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire novel. But to me, it it kind of is true to what I think of those characters. You know, it really depends how you read and interpret those characters, but essentially it's set in Westeros, like the normal world of A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's AU in that Gendry was genuinely born into the Baratheon line, and you know, him and Arya went to get married, but then Sansa's a bitch and she marries him, and then Arya meets a young Griff who turns out to be Aegon Targaryen, all this stuff. And it's like, if you have read and love A Song of Ice and Fire, it's so lore rich and heavy that, like, despite the romance and the violence and the wars that happen, and like it goes into generations of the, it's fucking amazing. Despite all that, you can get so into the lore of it, and even right now I'm getting so excited, and I'm constantly trying to get people to read it, and I love it so much. Like a novel, like if I could go buy that in a shop I would, and that is how much I love it. And I think that is something really important to take from fan fiction, is people don't just read it with the glow on their screen at 2 a.m. like, you know, that meme that's like boys whacking off and it's like porn, and it's like girls whacking off and it's it's like, it's not just like that. It's sometimes it is just genuinely very rich text, and some people just really flourish like getting a starting off point from someone else's original idea, and I don't think there's any shame in that. And I feel like I've spoken a lot, and I will come back to this, but come on, Skye.
No, I honestly, I love the passion at which you speak about this with, because like I've never read this particular fanfic. I wasn't as deep into the Game of Thrones fandom and enough maybe to like look for stuff like that. But I think this just really drives home like what you were just saying about like how rich it can be. Like, you have your silly fanfic, which I also love, and we'll get onto it. But there is something like when you're passionate about something, it shows, as Lyanna has just demonstrated beautifully. But like when fans write stuff, honestly, magic can be created. And I'm not even,
especially when they care that much, honestly.
Yeah. Because like you said, it goes into so much of the lore, and it's like, because you have your, I mean, at the end of the day, people read erotica, fanfic or not, people read erotica. And erotica, sometimes it has some premise set up, most of the time it doesn't, because it's written for the sake of being, for want of another word, book porn. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But when you have fans who are really dedicated, yes, they write aspects of that, but there's so much build up, like there's so much background. They like have this, they have an understanding of the characters that like they shouldn't have, but they do. And I think I really think it's fantastic.
It's fantastic because, in my opinion, fanfic is always a good thing, because you know, sometimes you will go so long without new content. The original, you know, thing that created fanfic was Star Trek, as most people know. You know, I
didn't know that.
Oh, okay. So
no, I did not know that.
So Star Trek comes out in the 60s, gets to about season 3, gets cancelled. The fans went absolutely nutty. It was not massive when it came out, but the fandom came through, and they were like printing magazines with their stories and such. And then the show basically had a resurgence like a decade later in the 70s, and it got big, it had a revival. Then you get, you know, new shows like Star Trek shows, and it pretty much single-handedly created fandom. Star Trek did.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so it's so fascinating to see that like that created this like domino effect. And I sometimes wonder, would fanfic happen without that, or was that just the one thing that happened to be the catalyst? I like to think it would have happened anyway, but people had been basically writing fanfiction for ages, because people wrote fanfiction like Jane Austen fanfiction, they wrote stuff about Sherlock Holmes. It was just it was called pastiche, and it was considered more highbrow. But what happened with Star Trek is it was like anyone was doing it. It wasn't, you know, like someone writing another novel of something. It was, I just want to write a short story about what would happen in a new Star Trek episode. Maybe some stuff about Spock. And it was just fun, and you could do whatever you want. And I find it so lovely that people can do that and share it with others. And so I don't understand why people would be against it. And to bring up an author which you enjoy who doesn't enjoy fanfiction.
Oh, here she comes. You can't have fanfic without her.
Miss Anne Rice herself.
Yeah.
When you talk about fanfiction, you have to bring her up. You just have
to. You really cannot. I mean, I'm sure people who have listened to our previous episodes, you would have heard this story before, but it warrants retelling.
I mean, you probably are more familiar with all of this than I am, so do you want to dive in?
Basically, at like its most basic terms, is everyone, well, if you don't know, Anne Rice is obviously the author of Into the Vampire, Queen of Down, The Vampire Lestat, i.e. some of my favorite books. I very much love the vampire genre. And if you have read them or even seen the film, you would have to have seen the intense homoeroticism that's in them. If you haven't, please go back to our Gays and Ghouls episode and then come back to this one. But because of that, and I think this is also an interesting point to get into, is that it was like that teasing of these queer characters and this queer coding. So people took that and they ran with it, and boy did they run. They create, like, you know, they kind of like, they retold the story of Interview with the Vampire, so it was like obviously gay, and Anne Rice did not like this. I kind of get it to an extent, because, you know, you do get, like, if you're a writer, especially a fiction writer, you do get very precious over your characters, so it's hard, I guess, especially for Interview with the Vampire, because the reason Anne Rice wrote that particular book was to like deal with the passing of her daughter and things like that,
which of course you see in one of the characters, so
yeah,
of course it's really personal, isn't it? But
so I don't know if for her, like in her experience, to see people taking it and like talking about another aspect of it maybe was a bit hurtful for her. But basically she got lawyers involved and just shut down the Interview with the Vampire fanfic community. Like, she was slapping cease and desists on people. It just became like notorious. Like, it didn't even sound real, the way she was kind of like hunting people down.
I just cannot even fathom loving a character and writing a story and then the writer sending me a cease and desist. Like, I understand everyone views things differently, but to me that is just so horrific and unnecessary.
I think it's because we've both also said in the past that, like, if anybody ever took our writing and our characters and turned it into fanfic, we would actually be quite honoured, because I think what a lot of people don't realise is that for fanfic authors, it will be because they are really passionate about this particular piece of fiction, and they're like, they need more, they want more from it. And because the author or the creator isn't going to do anymore, then they'll go off and do it themselves. Exactly. So it's a hard thing to balance.
It very much is, and it takes you into kind of the debate of death of the author in a way. I'd like to start this by saying, like, I'm going to go back to George R.R. quite a bit in this, because I mean, I know Game of Thrones fanfic, and he is notorious for not finishing stuff. So of course he has not revisited A Song of Ice and Fire for so long now, and it's like infamous that, you know, The Winds of Winter is probably never going to be released because he's kind of written himself into a corner and such. But anyway, he is not a massive fan of fan fiction, just like Anne Rice. But when you I don't like to say abandon, but when you kind of, you know, put a bit of a pause on your own work, you've created this gap for people to go a bit nuts, haven't you? You just have. You see it with fandom culture all the time. When you don't get a Marvel film released for more than 3 months, people start coming up with crazy debates and fights, and people just need to fill that gap. As much as authors can resent that, because at the end of the day, they are not a content machine. They can't keep churning stuff out. I kind of think they have to realize that when you put something out into the world, you don't necessarily have complete control over it anymore. And that isn't always a good thing. I am not completely subscribed to the idea of death of the author, but I'm also inclined to think that you have to accept what you put out into the world will be adjusted. And just because someone wants to take something and be inspired by it doesn't mean they've altered the original text. So as much as Anne Rice felt very, you know, like her text was personal and such, and I understand that, you can't then expect every single person to just take it for what it is and leave it alone. You just can't.
When you put it in a public domain like that. And I also think this is where we kind of get into the whole idea of like people starting to be a bit ashamed of reading it, because of, like, apart from, you know, fucking assholes making you feel bad about it, you know, you really enjoy these texts, like, and you probably enjoy them because the fanfic author writ them so well, but it's also because you enjoyed the original. Like, it's very rare that you will read a fanfic and have no association with the original piece. It's like the whole idea of like, they're so passionate about it that you want to share in that. And I think we've said this before, that like when you do create a piece of art and then you share it with the public, you do kind of have to expect that it's going to be received however people want to receive it, and you can't really control that, and you also can't really tell them they're wrong.
Yes, I completely agree, because at the end of the day, they're a fan of your work. It kind of just goes into anything that you put out into public. It's not just writing and fan fiction, is it? It's you see this debate all the time. It comes with music and sampling and references in art and every kind of creative media, really. Just, you can't put something out into the world and expect it to completely belong to yourself anymore. I think that's kind of like foolish in a way. It seems like a bit of a harsh word, but you can't expect it to go the way you want. And so I'm happy we agree on that. I'm really curious what people listening think of that. So like, I know we're only halfway through the episode, but I will say, please let us know what you think of that on social media, because I'm really curious if other people are going to agree.
Another thing that I think would cause debate, and I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts, actually leads into the fic.
Yes, let's do this.
This is gonna, as much as we're like saying like this is a safe space, this is about like we're championing fanfic, we're not like wanting people to be ashamed, and there are so many aspects of fanfic. However, I do think they fall into two very obvious categories in this sense, that you've got fan fiction like Lyanna was just talking about, that you have a piece of fantasy media or something that was created and people take it and run with it, and then you have the other side, which is when it starts to involve real people, real celebrities. So for that reason, I'm not gonna be giving the actual name of the fic that I read. If anybody has read it, you're most likely going to be able to guess it. It's not that I'm saying there's any shame in it, because, you know, I have read it even recently. It's just that, like Lyanna said, when I was younger, you didn't think about stuff like that. You didn't think about like the problems of it and things. And like this particular fic that, well, I'm going to call Moon Dust instead of giving it its real name. The way that it was written, it really did not feel like it was about real people. It was like it just used their names. And for me, my like whole introduction to fanfic was like a bit, I don't know if anybody's was like not strange, I guess, but like, so when I was younger, what happened is that I started writing something, and I did have a Wattpad account. I did post on Wattpad. I did have a pseudonym name when I was a teenager. It is all gone now. But I was writing and posting something that like I've worked on for a long time, and it looks very different to the way it originally did. But people used to comment on it and tell me it really sounded like this particular fic. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was on my radar and I knew about it, but I never read it because I don't know, I guess just again, because it was like the real aspect of it. I didn't want to cross that line. And then when I had like a course in either college or uni, I can't remember. And one of my assignments was to research fanfic, because we were looking at like fanfic of like classical pieces like Pride and Prejudice and Emma and things like that, and like it just popped into my head. I was like, oh, okay. So I finally decided to read it, and then it was just like a black hole from there in like the best way.
That's just fanfic experience though, honestly.
It literally, like, it was like, it changed over the years of me reading it, but that particular, like the first time I read it was very stereotypical. I wasn't in the best place at this time in my life, so it was like a real comfort to me to have this thing that I enjoyed reading a lot. And it also, and I guess this is why I'll be so grateful to it and like keep feeling about it the way that I do, but it kind of like reignited my love of writing, because it taught me that writing didn't have to have rules.
Yes,
it could kind of be whatever, but like, you know, it was set like this fic was set in a different time. A lot of the people that were in it, I didn't actually even know they were real people, because I was involved in this fandom, which is why I wanted to read it, but I wasn't like so deep that I knew everybody who was associated to it. I do now, because it's been like I said, it's been like what, 8-10 years. But I think the biggest thing with it was like, yeah, it was over 500,000 words. It was split into like different sections, and also it all happened to be out at the time that I was reading it. So like it did get posted, I think, in like chapter by chapter, but I was never around for the original. So I think I read it all in maybe a week, like locked up in my room. And it was just like, it was like that experience of, there was an intimacy to it because I was the only one in my life reading it, and it felt like I was the only one that knew of its existence. But then I would read the comments of people freaking out and loving it, and I kind of felt, it was so weird because like I fell into the fandom of this fic, not the actual fandom.
I've done the same.
So much, like people would like, they were talking about these characters like they were literally characters. Like
that's what happens when a fic is so far removed from real people. Like,
yeah.
And then that begs the question, why base it on real people?
Yeah, I think
just write a book.
Yeah, I mean, Lyanna knows the particular fandom that this was. And I think it was because obviously this author just loved this fandom and they wanted to like have their part in it. And I think like yours as well, it's the fic of the fandom. Well, there are two of this particular fandom. One of them is really problematic, and again, if you know, you know. Whereas this one was more like the real literature version. I don't know how else to describe it.
No, I get it, because you know, we were saying fandom is split into two major fanfic is split into two major camps. Real people, fictional characters. You then split into the subgroups, and in both of those major camps you have the subgroup of literature and smart. You basically do, like, I know that's an oversimplification, but that's what it boils down to. And I do understand, because I've seen the same in the fandoms I was involved in. Like, there were the ones where people were like, this was fun, in the comments, like, damn, that was hot, blah, blah, blah. And you get these ones like, that was incredible, I cannot wait for the next chapter, and they get genuinely excited for it, like it's a serial in an old newspaper. You know. And
the thing is,
I completely
Lyanna,
understand
is that like this fic was both. Like, it did have really erotic, like I said, the people that know will know. But it had really erotic scenes in it. It did have problematic themes. It was, I'm just going to keep narrowing this down, and people are probably definitely going to guess what it is. But I think it came out in like 2009. So it was a sign of the times anyway. On top of that, it was a fanfic, and there are a lot of things people explore in fanfics that don't really seem to have consequences. But there was also like what's it called, like the fluffy side of things. Like, it had those really tender moments. The characters were like really thought out. Like, it wasn't just sex. It was like a whole storyline that, like I said, it was like a 500,000 words long.
That is insane to me. That's like some like Wheel of Time shit, honestly.
It was, but it literally was though. And it was just,
stop it. Like, because I always think the one I love, no further than me, I recommend. I always think that is stupid long, and you're talking like 3-4 times the length. Like, you're insane, honestly. Considering what you read, I'm not going to give too many clues, because like you say, you don't want to reveal the name, but it's not got an entire fantasy world built around it.
No, this is right. So it's set in reality, which I think, and I think this is where like also our just preferences in general differ, which there's nothing wrong about, but just like media in general, I do much prefer stuff set in reality. Like, my own writing is very much set in reality. So this was something else. I also think, and this is again where it comes back into the queerness that was fanfic mostly. I had kind of just come out around the time, and this fic was hella queer.
Oh.
And I think, even though I was not going through any of the problems these characters were, because again, it was set in a different decade, I was like, I don't know, it almost felt like a rite of passage after coming out to have this like fanfic that meant so much to me.
See, I obviously, if you don't mind me asking, I'd like to dive into the area of queer fanfic, because of course we're both writers, and I think a lot of people that consume fanfic are or will become writers. That's a very big part of it. It's that inspiration, like, oh, you don't just have to be published, anyone can put out their work, blah blah blah. Anyway, that's a whole thing. Of course, we both write primarily romance stories. Maybe one day in the future we will share them publicly, but just for our listeners to know, that is kind of me and Skye's thing. I'm not going to reveal too much about your own writing, because that's not my place, but of course, are you okay with me sharing you've written a story about 2 male love interests? I don't reveal too much about your own writing.
No, that's fine.
So, of course, when someone, say, doesn't have the sexual orientation of, you know, the characters they're writing or consuming, where do you fall on that? Because, of course, this is a massive debate in fanfic.
So it is really difficult, because I feel like it changes with age. And I think this is even a reason why, like I said, I don't really want to reveal the name of this fanfic, because whilst I do, like, as a piece of writing, I do think it's really good. I don't agree that it was based on real people. Also, these real people do know of its existence, which is a whole other thing as well.
Yes, we have a few examples of that. We'll get to that,
but so so I myself, like I said, I've written stories about two male love interests, and these are stories that I don't think I'm ever going to publish. I think a lot of it for me was just like exploring different things in my writing. Like I have, and I'm sure Lyanna, you're the same, I have a lot of writing that I'm never intending to even try and get published.
Yeah.
It's just a way that I wanted to write. But we were even talking about earlier today, like it really comes into this whole idea of, people always say, write what you know.
Yeah.
However, if you are going to write something that you have never experienced, you have to at least do your research, talk to people. I think this is the biggest thing. Like, yeah, doing online research is great, but if you're really unsure about something, you need to speak to people who have experienced this, because they will tell you whether or not you have a right to have this voice.
Completely agree.
Like, yeah, not to get like, because again, fan fiction's it's a little bit different, because like I said, it's not always meant to be taken super seriously. And this, say, particular fanfic was written, well, as far as I'm aware, it was written by a woman. I'm sure their name was a pen name, but they referred to themselves as she, her, so I do believe it was a woman. It was very obviously written by a woman, not to stereotype, but again, the whole idea of men written by women was really obvious. If the actual people had not found out about it, which I know kind of sounds a bit dirty, but if they had not found out about it, I don't think it would have been problematic exactly. Like, yes, there were still problems in the actual storyline itself, but they were meant to be in there. It was like really stereotypical things that you always find in kind of
like those
queer
toxic
writing
things that always get thrown in fan fiction for trauma and dramatic action. Yeah, of course.
So yeah, if it hadn't been brought, but again, the only reason it was brought to the attention of the fans, of the real celebrities, is because the fans did it. They were like sending it to them, and they were like, and I get it, because I can put myself in that, like, not when I was younger, but now I can put myself in that position and realize like how uncomfortable obviously that would be. Awful. Like, even though like we said, when you're kind of in that kind of industry and you're putting yourself out there is so much, like there is a line.
There is very much a line. I mean, there's one thing people altering your content and the things you create, and then there's one thing like people running with you as a person. Because and I just want to slightly introduce another topic, which is you know, like we're getting into fandom based on real people, and we watched a film earlier today which is very much based on a real person. It's infamous, but I'll wait a minute before we super get into that one. Basically, I think it's one thing to write this stuff. It's another thing to like really push it on people. And like you say, it was the fans, not necessarily the writer, but the writer must have known that there was a risk of the
the writer actually addressed it.
Oh, wow.
For this particular fic, the writer did address it and say that she was really happy the connection people could make with her writing, but she was like, stop fucking sending it to them, stop bringing it. And like, whilst that was admirable, like you said, she had to be aware that what she was doing would probably eventually reach them. But like I said, she did try to kind of like put a stop in it and went, you know, if you enjoy my writing, that's great, but don't ruin this for everybody. Don't then, you know, say bring it to their attention, make it this horrible thing. Because, you know, when we originally we were gonna start recording this episode, I wasn't sure whether or not to even talk about it, because I was like, I do still feel like a bit uncomfortable that for me it was like a really important fanfic, even though it was based off these real people. In this fanfic, there were characters.
Yes.
And I got really involved with the character fanfic. Like, people would literally like, they would use their names, but they would put the name of the fic before their name, so you knew they were talking about the fic and not the real people.
Yeah.
It's hard because it's like I said, it's still the real people. However you frame it, even though she tried to tell people to not talk to them about
write a story about just fictional people, you chose to base it. And I had mentioned to you earlier today, and you looked absolutely horrified, that there is a video of I think it's Dylan Sprouse, very much aware of fanfic between him and his twin brother, and actually reading it in an interview, and he seemed a bit horrified. Like, he could joke about it, but that is a bit traumatizing, and it makes me concerned for who would write those things. But
I didn't even
regardless
know this
of if it's incest,
you're
weird if you like, you know, try and act like it's not weird. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to write things, and it's another to completely just disregard the impact of it. And I just found it so bizarre with that video. People find it funny, Like, that is horrific to me. I can't imagine people writing those things about me.
But do you know, though, this is like, again, where it comes to the whole idea of when fanfic is based on real people, there is still a line.
Of course there is.
And like, that is a fucking line, because people did the same thing with like Gerard Way and Mikey Way from My Chemical Romance. Like, there was fanfic out there of them, and I was like, they're fucking siblings. Like,
I think it's a case of people being so desensitized to these people and needing to forget they're real living human beings. And prime example of that we are going to dive in is One Direction.
Yeah.
So me and Skye were never One Direction. Like, we've never like obsessed. We weren't. What were the fans even called? Directioners?
I think so.
I don't know, who knows.
Yeah.
But so obviously we were not super into it. Like, don't get me wrong, they had one or two songs I could like get on with, but I was never like invested in them as people. I thought Zayn was kind of cute. That was kind of the extent of it for me. So I have struggled for years to understand the obsession. So as in, I can understand the appeal as much as you can, as far as you can understand the appeal of things, but I have never understood the obsession to the point of like Taylor Swift fan obsession, where they dive into every single little thing. They're wearing this shirt and they're wearing this thing. And it got to the point of course, people writing fanfic about them being with each other. And is it Larry? That's the really big fandom.
Yeah.
Louis and Harry. Yeah. To the point, did you know that they knew of it and it actually caused their friendship to slightly disintegrate?
Do you know what though, Lyanna? It's like really ironic, because this was literally what happened with the fic that I'm talking about.
Exactly. And I think people need to think about these things before they put this stuff out into the world. And it's so fascinating to me that people were so adamant about being real that they actually ruined a real life friendship. Yeah. And people were devastated when One Direction broke up and Zayn leaving and such, but part of me can't help but think that some of the actions of these fans, like these incredibly explicit fanfics they were writing, kind of contributed. I mean, I wasn't in there, so I can't say that for a fact, but it's kind of obvious that can't have helped the situation and their bond.
And then it didn't stop after, because like I said, we weren't like super involved in it, but it didn't really stop after that, because then obviously when the band broke up, people thought that was the reason why. And it's like,
because they were all seeing each other, and it was just so ridiculous. It's like, this isn't Daisy Jones. Like, this isn't Fleetwood Mac. Also, that, you know what, saying that's another thing we can talk about. We can talk about how Daisy Jones is clearly Fleetwood Mac fanfic. But anyway, regardless, I just think that like the One Direction fanfic and the one you're talking about, it's so creepy to me that people were so heavily involved. It's like, it wasn't a one-off thing. It wasn't this one thing where people go, holy shit, that's real. It was like a fandom. Like, they actually had like these huge communities of like multiple pieces of fiction, God knows how many and how many readers. And like, I can't help but think at that point, just create fictional characters.
I think it's definitely like what you spoke about at the beginning of this episode, an age thing, because now that, like, say for me, it's been like 10 years or whatever since I originally read this fic, like my thoughts on it are very different, obviously, considering the fact that like I'm not really encouraging people to go find it now. And I'm not excusing the actions at all, because you're completely right in everything that you're saying, but I do think a lot of it comes from age. That like, again, when I was younger and I was reading it, I was like, how can me reading this contribute to like not that I'm saying the fic did destroy anybody's lives, it didn't. I think the events that happened, because they just happened the way they were going to happen anyway, but things like this, just fan intensity, fanfic or no, fan intensity is always like a big thing when it comes to like, especially bands and music, because like with acting and stuff, you only spend so long with this group of people, and then like once the filming's done, you move on. Bands are different. Like, you're with them for a long time. They now become your family. So when that like weird line starts to kind of be drawn, I can understand how, like, even if it isn't the ultimate factor, it's definitely got to be a contributing one.
I agree. And this, Skye, is why you need to read Daisy Jones and the Six. Because I mean, the incredible TikTok sound going around at the minute from Euphoria, This is fucking about us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the best one I've seen in ages was one where a girl was like, Fleetwood Mac watching the Daisy Jones and the Six series when it comes out. And so this is fucking play about us. But honestly, I have not yet seen something which kind of like takes a real life event and runs with, not a real life event, like real life scenario, and runs with it and kind of like takes it and makes it its own thing so well, because you're very much aware that this is based on this group of people, but it's not like every single person has an avatar like it is in, say, After, but which we're going to get to really soon.
Which is what we watched today, just in case anyone is curious.
But yeah, so say in Fleetwood Mac, I don't know how familiar you are with the drama in Fleetwood Mac.
Not super
kind
familiar,
of
but I know of
fascinating.
it.
Stevie Nicks dated Lindsay Buckingham. They were fucking mental together. But like anyone that's into that push and pull, they love it, you know? And the central relationship in Daisy Jones and the Six resembles it. It isn't quite the same because there's not so much confirmation. It's a lot more vague. And I think that's why people do love Daisy Jones and the Six and why they're so excited for the show, you know, see that like dynamic play out on screen. And, you know, there's different relationships within the group. And that happened within Fleetwood Mac. But of course, not every single person resembles a real life person in Fleetwood Mac. It's more, how fascinating is it that there was this group where there was weird dynamics and then someone else, a woman, got brought in that made them famous. And it's just the basic core concept. And it works so well because they based it in the same era. So it's the 70s and similar music style, but it's not so explicitly based on real people. And I just think this is something that the author Taylor Jenkins Reid is incredible at, because say with Seven Husbands, which you have read and makes you very happy read it, she said it's based on a lot of A-lister Hollywood actresses, hasn't she? Like I feel awful because I completely blanked on her name. She played Cleopatra. She had like a shit ton of husbands. Black hair.
People are gonna hate us so much.
Oh my god, what is her name? Oh no, I remember Elizabeth Taylor. So yes. It's like, if you're familiar with like classic Hollywood, which interestingly does actually have a fandom. I don't know if you knew this.
I did know this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's really, really interesting. But anyway, it's so obviously based on her and how she had all these different like really publicized marriages, you know, like married people twice, all that jazz. But again, it's not so obvious it's based on a real person. It's more the idea and like the fantasy and the legend of someone, isn't it? And if you ask me, if you are so inspired by a real life person, you want to write something, that's the way to do it, honestly. Like, just personal opinion, but that's how you can do it without affecting someone.
I do also think this is a sign of the times though, because like to be fair, this is why we wanted to talk about what like our biggest fics were, because we'll probably keep referring to them as like examples. And I think it was just so interesting. Like I said, you had one that was based in fantasy, I had one that was based in reality. But like this one, for example, I feel like because again, the only people that are probably going to know are people that have read it, but I'm pretty sure the author at one point was starting to rewrite it as like a completely fictional novel. Like,
that's mad. Actually,
I haven't followed her in a long time, so like I wouldn't know, but at one point she was on the journey to start like actually writing it so it could be published, because like a lot of fanfic actually is anyway, there were physical copies being sold.
Physical?
But I think there were like, and it was the same with the After fanfic as well, because I won't name them, but I know somebody who was really into the One Direction fanfiction, and they had physical copies of the original fanfic, because anybody can self-publish.
I kind of just have to go on a tiny bit of a tangent here. When you say that, do you mean like the actual After novel, or like before they changed name?
Like,
so when it was actually like
the OG fanfic. And the same with Moondust, which it sounds so fucking stupid to call it that, but with the fic that I'm on about, same thing. It had like a really beautiful cover. Like, honestly, if you didn't know the fandom, you would just be like, this completely is the problem, sold into
isn't it? Is like, when is it harmless, when is it harmful? Because some people coming across these things, they don't know it's based on real people. They have no clue. So it's like, you can't control it. But anyway, sorry.
Just the point I was going to make with what you were saying is that like with this one, I think a lot of it was because, you know, when you're a writer, we know this, just creative people in general, it is really hard to get people to notice you. So I feel like the reason that they did what they did is because they knew there was already a really dedicated fan base to this fandom and these
This is the
particular
thing.
people. So like, I mean, it's like OG SEO, you know, like when you're searching for these people, this is what's going to come up.
I mean, like any AO3 connoisseur like myself, you've seen that tag shit. Like they will include a paragraph about certain characters just because they can then include it in the tags. So like we're saying, you might not be familiar with something, but you've become one of the consumers because you've stumbled across, because they're weirdly fucking genius. And that's when I start to get weirdly suspicious of these writers and wonder how old they are, because 13-year-olds don't think to do that.
I think people would be surprised at the ages. Like I mean, to be fair, I guess anyone's writing, you can kind of tell. So like, I'm pretty sure the woman who wrote the one that I'm on about was like in her early 20s when she wrote it. Like it wasn't like as far as I'm aware, it wasn't like a teenager that wrote it. But again, like you said, you can kind of tell, because like I used to like to believe that I was a prolific writer when I was like 15, but I wasn't. The stuff I wrote was pretty shit. I'd like to think I'm better now, but you know, I am 25 approaching 26. It's taken this long to get there. So yeah, but this also then leads us on to something we could not. So Lyanna had said that she wanted to see the After films, because if you're going to talk kind of like the Anne Rice thing, if you're going to talk about fanfic, you can't not talk about After, because it's not the only one. It's like, it's one of those things people are like, I've never read a fanfic or I've never watched a fanfic, and it's like that you know of.
Yeah.
And After's a
50
big part
Shades,
of that.
baby. Come
we'll
on.
get there.
Do you know
we
what?
will get there.
I'm just going to say, we're quite a bit into this episode and there's a long way to go. So listeners, buckle in, because you're probably like not far into this that we know.
Get a snack, get a drink, get the AO3 tab ready.
Take a pee break at this point, because like bringing up 50 Shades, I got way more steam in me, honest.
Well, to stay on After for a second.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, go for it.
I've lost my train of thought.
I'm so sorry. So you said Lyanna had wanted to watch the After films.
So Lyanna had wanted to watch the After films, but she hadn't got around to it because, you know, busy lives. So I said to her, I was like, you know, whilst we're just having a drink and chilling today, why don't we, like, I was like, just watch the second one.
Yeah.
And like, I know that sounds crazy because everyone's like, how can you watch the second one and not watch the first one? It's because anyone who's watched it knows that like, it's like the first one is the epitome of what fluff is in fanfic.
Yeah.
And then the second one is the epitome of what smut is in fanfic. I mean,
come on. Like, I literally was telling you beat for beat what was going to happen, and I'd never seen the first. If you've read, you don't even have to have read fanfic, you have to have read like 2. And this is a thing which I'm going to touch on towards the end of this episode. What's it called? Like contemporary lit? I fucking young. Was it new adult? It just means
new adult.
It just means smart. Anyone that's read one of those books can tell you what is going to happen in the entire After trilogy. And you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing, because, and this is the appeal of these films, and why I told you I wanted to watch them, there's something comforting in that. There really is.
There is.
Especially if you know, like, you watch a lot of darker shit. Sometimes, or consume a lot of dark shit. Sometimes you do just want something which takes it back to basics, and you know what's coming, but you can just enjoy the ride. Like, it's fun.
I don't think it's even like always dark shit. It's like, because we always say that like there's like the passive and active audience. Yes. And it doesn't matter which one you are, both are fine. Yeah. But we're very much active audience members. Like, we'll watch even like something like fucking After and try and analyze it. Like, we were rewriting.
Oh my god, stop.
And we were like, oh my god, this could have been so deep if they
literally
done it
me
like
and Skye
this.
watching After going, do you know what, if they change that one sentence, like, and honestly, Skye, the version we were writing could have been a good fucking film. And I don't mean
it
like
would have fucking slapped.
A masterpiece. I'm talking 2.5 stars on Letterboxd instead of like 1 star. But it could have just been like, it could have been a film where you'd watch it and you'd think like, yeah, that was good. I enjoyed
some thought
it.
Actually went into this.
Yeah, like some thought. But like, the thing is, that's the fun of it. That is the fun of a lot of fan fiction, is it's bad. And I hate to say it, because at the end of the day, a writer put their blood, sweat and tears into it. Yeah. But it's fun. It's so fun.
It is so fun. And I also think there's like, and again, this is where like it goes back to your question of like, you know, if you're going to write something that detailed, why not do it originally? It's because there's like a safety zone in stuff that already exists. And you're like, if you have like, because writer's block is the worst fucking feeling. So like if you have it, you're just like, I'm just gonna Google what happened in this scene or this particular point in history, and I'm just gonna use that instead, because like it's just it's like I used to use like I didn't write like actual, it's hard to describe. I didn't write actual fan fiction, but like I would use it as like writing exercises.
Oh, like prompts.
Yeah, so
Yes.
again, Lyanna will know the fanfic that I keep talking about did actually inspire me to write my own. Like honestly, it got me back into writing again. Yes,
Is it
Lyanna,
what
I can see.
inspired your big
Yes,
project?
yes,
No,
it
stop
did.
it.
I don't know how you haven't made that connection yet.
No, because now you say it's very obvious.
This is a project that like is never going to be released to the public, so anyone that's listening may never read it.
Forget about it.
But like when I was like in a really horrible place in my mental health and just my life in general, and I had this fic and I was like, fuck, I want to start writing again. So I did, and like I didn't like copy and paste this fic, but it had like huge inspiration. It was almost like you just said, it's what I would have done if I was writing it and it wasn't actually based on these real people.
Do you know what? That is me when I go back and I reread Seven Husbands. There are times when you go and read something and you think, bitch, my rewriting is its own thing. And that is my point with fan fiction. When you change so much, it is completely new. It's fair use, honestly. You can go into the whole fair use debate. We can go into so many theoretical debates when we talk about fan fiction, honestly. Like we're saying, death of the author, fair use, everything. It's fascinating what fan fiction takes you into, honestly. And like I said earlier, it is so a world, an area for writers, because like we're saying, you think, I like what they did there.
Yeah.
You know what? And so for myself, when I read No Feather Bed for Me, I'm like, yeah. And I go to myself, I like that Gendry said this subtly. And then you go, I'm going to employ that in my own stuff. But in a book, you may notice that, but you notice it more in fanfic because it's different to what you've already read. So it stands out. Does that make sense?
Huge. I actually think reading fanfic is like a writing exercise.
I completely agree. It's like a writing class almost.
It really is.
I love it.
I know you like the term. I know like you hate the term elevated horror, but like fanfic is like elevated literature.
honestly. No,
because you're so right, and like that's what it was for me. Like I started writing, and I'm not like trying to get like super deep with this, but like I'm not sure my writing would be where it is right now if I hadn't read that fic.
Completely agree, honestly, because if we're, we've talked about After. I don't know if you have other things to say before I move on a little bit.
Not things that people are gonna like, so we can just move on.
But anyway, After brings me to, making films out of fanfic and kind of like, adapting fanfic in a similar way to 50 Shades. I don't really know if we have anything original to say about 50 Shades.
Nothing original,
it's kind of interesting to change names and make something new. But other than that, like, it's been said a million times. We've got to mention it in this episode, but I don't really have anything to say.
For like, I guess for anybody who doesn't know, because I was actually having a conversation with somebody at work the other day and they didn't know this, but like 50 Shades of Grey is a Twilight fan fiction. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will know, but some really don't.
It's mad, isn't
and
it?
Like honestly, it was the exact same journey as After.
It just like changing names, and it's smuttier, and you put it out, and that's it really.
But I know this isn't like necessarily related to fanfic, but like if we're just talking about 50 Shades of Grey, I kind of feel like we have to talk about the impact 50 Shades of Grey had.
I have many things to say, right, about 50 Shades itself, no, but about its cultural dominance and its cultural impact a lot. So I'm going to dive into some real life anecdotes here, because that's the best bit of listening to a podcast, and we all know it. When I was 15, I started a job at a cafe at a fucking theme park, and do you know what I mean? In your head, that's wholesome. You're 15 years old. You're making like, I don't know if anyone listening to this worldwide is going to know what is a pasty. It's from our home area. It's the yummiest food in the world. Whatever.
I've never felt more like a Southwest girl than when you said that sentence.
So you just kind of like, I was just making foods and like teas and like stuff like that. And I'm minding my own business, right? Like I'm on the phone to my friends and stuff like that. And one woman I worked with, looking back, she was not that old. But to a 15-year-old, they're very old and they're worldly. And really looking back, she's probably 22. But she kept being on a Kindle. And I kept thinking to myself at that age, loser. Because of course Kindle reads like old person when you're that age.
Yeah,
and
we've had this discussion before.
Yeah. They weren't new by any means, but they still weren't widely used yet. They were only really used by people that read a lot so they could justify it. But anyway, she always had her Kindle on her in the kitchen. Quiet 10 minutes, she's on the Kindle. I'm like, what the fuck can she be reading that is that good? And do you know what? It was 50 Shades of Grey. And the receptionist came in one day. What are you reading, love? 50 Shades of Grey. Like, it ended up having a ripple effect. And this was before it became a worldwide phenomenon. And I remember asking my mum, because I recognized the cover from seeing it on a game, Mum, are you reading? Oh my God, Lyanna, no. Like, all this stuff. And I kind of connected the dots later on that the rise of Kindles kind of coincided with the rise of 50 Shades, because people could read it.
Lyanna, there are literally statistics that 50 Shades of Grey increased the popularity of Kindles and ebooks.
And it's so fascinating. I absolutely love it.
You know, I was just saying that, like, you know, I thought we were going to go off the fan fiction tangent here with 50 Shades of Grey, but we're not, because 50 Shades of Grey is the same thing with fanfic. Like, people were ashamed to be reading it.
Exactly.
And like, just to talk about like real.
Yeah. Go for it. Sorry.
Just to talk about like real world effects again, like when we were in school, you remember at like the beginning of English, we would have like quiet reading time.
Yeah.
And everybody would be like reading something, and like, again, I'm not going to name them, but I can tell you who it was after we finished recording this. Somebody on my table was reading 50 Shades of Grey, and it was like astounding because she was reading the physical copy and she was not ashamed. And I don't know if this is going to offend some people, but like, it's not meant to sound offensive. Basically, she asked what flogging was.
Oh my God.
She was reading it and she just asked our table what flogging was. And because a lot of people didn't even really know what 50 Shades of Grey was at the time, so they didn't realize what she was reading, they used the example of a story from the Bible to explain what flogging was. And I just remember being sat there during that exchange, and I hadn't read 50 Shades of Grey yet, but I knew what it was. It was on my radar. And I was sat there during that
with the context clue, you're like,
yeah, I was just kind of like, I don't really know if the author ever intended for like
this situation,
Christ and 50 Shades of Grey and flogging to all be put in the same sentence.
It's so mad to me, because I remember, and I think we're talking about the same person if I'm right, I remember being in geography class and someone reading it, and the teacher being like, what are you reading? And I remember my sister going on a French trip with the geography lot, and her literally texting me saying the geography teacher was reading that book at the front of the bus. And it made my day, because I was like, the lack of shame was incredible. And that has evolved to what we see on Book Talk today. And of course, we're going to have to bring up Book Talk. We just are. I have my opinions about Book Talk. We'll probably do an episode. At the end of the day, what it boils down to, it's always good if people are getting into reading. Like, end of, really. As long as they're not reading really horrific stuff, which Book Talk kind of can get people into, but that's another topic, then fair do. But a lot of it, and we have to admit this, is smut. It is. That's what's got people back into it. And you know what? Good for them. Brilliant. But what I will say is that not everyone in that audience should be reading it in a similar way to 50 Shades. It's fine to read fanficky stuff. And at the end of the day, a lot of fanficky stuff which reaches a wider audience is adapted and just comes out as like a normal smut book, which we kind of touched on earlier, has kind of been named new adult, which I don't really understand. But new adult, I know it's like a lot of things. It's a big umbrella and genre, but a lot of it is very smut heavy. A lot of stuff in, you know, Book Talk circles, in new adult shelves is it's repackaged fan fiction. And it's so frustrating that people kind of try to gloss over that and paint over that, because they're there singing the praises of these books, but then they would shit on fanfic. And it's like, but you're reading fanfic.
But you know what? It's like kind of almost what we were speaking about like just before we started recording, and something we spoke about in like one of our Halloween episodes. It's a similar vein to, at the moment, the popularity Attack on Titan has, right? Which again is very related to fanfic, because everybody knows the Attack on Titan and Fan Fiction Association. Anyway,
you know what?
But Attack on Titan is currently obviously really, really popular. I'm getting confused here. But people are still shitting on anime, right? People are watching Attack on Titan and they're still shitting on anime. And we said this back in our K-horror episode. It's the same thing with Squid Game. People were shitting on K-dramas, but then they were praising Squid Game. And it's one of those things that it's like, fan fiction isn't one novel. It is a genre.
Yes, and they're trying to remove themselves from it, aren't they?
Exactly. So it's like, okay, so you don't like the real life aspects of fanfic. You don't like the smutty aspects of fanfic. That's fine. There's so much you can explore. The same with anime, the same with K-dramas. Like, it's like, you like horror. Do you like every single horror film? No, of course you don't. It's the exact same thing. And I feel like you just said it's the same thing with new adult, that it's like it is just repackaged fan fiction.
Yes.
And it's a way for people to justify to themselves that they're not just reading fan fiction. It's
and
like,
I can give you the best fucking example, and I told you I was going to do it. The love hypothesis. I have things to say. I have things to say. You
need to tell me what this is now, because I've never heard of it.
My dear friend Kaya, they have been a guest on this podcast, Gays and Ghouls Halloween episode a few years back. As soon as I said I was reading this book, Kaya, and I'm sure they'll be fine with me saying this, urged me to put that shit down, honestly. And I was like, nah, there can't be any harm in it. There can't be any harm in it. Fuck me. Honestly, fuck me. Problem is, these books, like fan fiction, because they, as we are saying, are repackaged fan fiction, you cannot stop turning them pages, because it does not matter how crap it is. It's just written in such a page-turning way, like chapter by chapter, like fanfic. So the love hypothesis, I'll describe the book and then I'll tell you what it's based on. See if you can gather.
Okay.
We're in the world of academia. We've got a young woman named Olive. Yeah? Cool name. Very much a YN kind of vibe, being called Olive. You know what I mean? She has this passion. She's not like other girls. She wants to go into academia. There is a guy who has a reputation in the university. He's a hard ass. He always misgrades people. Her friends hate him. She's never been in his class, but when she interviewed at that uni, her contacts were fucked one day. She was crying and some guy was like talking to her, but she couldn't see him because she was crying for her contacts. But she thought he was really tall. He was really broody. He had a long nose. He had like longish black hair. And I was like, huh. It's based on a character.
I have no idea what this is based on.
Okay, right. Put it this way. I don't know. Basically, it's Kylo Ren. Okay.
Oh God.
So it's Kylo. It's what's it called? Rilo. It's repackaged Rilo.
Yeah.
Oh fuck me, honestly. Like some fan fiction, when they change the name, you're like, how is this based on those characters? Because it's got nothing to do with them. So you realize the fan fiction has nothing to fucking do with them. They've literally just taken the characters and put them in a completely different world, and it doesn't make any sense other than the physical description of them. But like, fuck me, that book. Like everyone was talking, like it went viral. Everyone on TikTok was talking about how like dirty it was and like how good the romance was. And I thought, if it's dirty and good romance, like a really good balance, like I'll read that shit. I don't give a fuck. No. Like I hate to say it, I did not enjoy it. Like don't get me wrong, it was like a fun read to read one night, like if you're not paying like £10 for the physical copy. But and this is, I will say this actually, when we talk about young adult and booktop books, Kindles have definitely helped with that as well, and Kindle Unlimited, because not everyone wants to spend lots of money on these books, which, and I know they hate to admit it, are not necessarily incredible, because they don't want to spend $8.99 a pop on these books, you know, because I think people very much aware they are not incredible. But anyway, I'm not trying to take away from the writers, because at the end of the day, writing a novel is an incredible feat. But what is going on? I'm just going to circle around to that. Like, what is happening where you just have to change the name from a fanfic and get published? Like, but like you say, the appeal's there. So the demand is there.
I feel like that's like prime SEO though, of like you just said, like these characters had like no association to their original characters, and yet they still decided to do it. It's like, just because it's so funny, because in my story that was inspired by the fic that I read, I actually addressed, like, fourth wall break, addressed the whole idea of fan fiction.
Oh wow.
And the fact that, like, I had one of the characters talking about how, like, these fantasies are safe inside fans' heads, but, like, then once they're unleashed, they do all this damage. And this was, like, specifically about, like, real life ones. But again, it was a really similar thing where it's like, yeah, you take these characters and it doesn't even have to have any association with them, but like you said, then why? Like, do you I mean, this particular one I can't really comment on because I wasn't even deep enough in that kind of fandom to even be able to comment on it. But yeah, I didn't expect it to be that when you told me what it was.
I know, it's daft, isn't it? But I find it hilarious you say it's SEO, like it's the SEOification of
I'm making it sound so sophisticated. Like,
no, it's not. No, because at the end of the day, when it took that like leap onto BookTok and BookTok became a thing, of course it was then gonna, you know, completely evolve into something and create. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know BookTok isn't responsible for new adult, but you have to admit there is a bit of a correlation. But it's just fascinating to me to see basically a fanfic become this like real published presence, and not just, oh, you can buy it on Amazon, but like you can walk into your bookshop and find
and it's there.
So many books based on fanfic, and they're not even necessarily smutty. I mean, yes, let's be real, like 99%, but you will get ones which are just so clearly based on another world, and it is insane to me. But then as much as I say it's insane, the amount of books you read where it's so obvious it's inspired by this other thing. I think it really gets under the fanfic label when it's a woman publishing the story online. If it isn't that, then it isn't called fanfic.
Do you know what though? Like, not to again try and get like philosophical about a topic, but you could also go into like the whole idea of like sexism in the fanfic community, because like you just said, like when it's written by a woman, they're like, oh, it's smutty. It's like if you haven't even read it, you're like, oh, it's obviously just written for like self-pleasure and blah 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 and whatever. And it's just like, have you actually read it? No. It's not always that. It's like there are so many reasons people write fanfic. Like it's because they really like something and they don't want it to end. It's because they saw an element in something and they wanted to explore it. Somebody wanted to do a writing exercise. Somebody was really horny one night and did decide to write just smutty smuts. But like there's so many different aspects of it, and like it's just like anything, it's such a shame how it was shamed so much that even we didn't talk about it together. Like it took until
insane to look back on.
Like before this episode we've spoken about like our fanfic eras before, but like it's taken till now to really get into it. And like I didn't even tell you what my fanfic was until I think the other night.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because there was still that shame associated with it, and like now I don't have a shame about it. It is again just not about wanting to draw attention to it, but like now I'm kind of like, you know what, yeah, I read it and it, like I said, it inspired some of my own writing. It helped me get back into writing, and this is where like the whole idea of like the fan bit of fan fiction really comes in. You know, like there was this whole community of people that I met through this fic, like not even necessarily to do with this fandom, but like just to do with writing in general, and like they really helped me, like, you know, not to sound like, oh, I need appraisal and compliments and stuff, but having people read my stuff and be like, wow, this is actually really good, made me realize, okay, maybe I can make a career out of this.
And this is where, like, I imagine we're wrapping up a little bit here, but this is where I just want to, like, on a final note, say that fanfiction is kind of important because it allows people to have safe prompts and explore worlds they already know and are comfortable with to write and get experience. Because you might really like writing fantasy, but you might not be confident completely creating a world. You know, you might be wanting to write romance and really struggle with how to create characters and dynamics, but because there's, you know, already established characters and dynamics, you can explore that and just write dialogue and like scenes. And for that reason, I honestly think that people shouldn't be ashamed about their fan fiction past. I understand being embarrassed about the quality of your writing, so not necessarily wanting to share, you know, like your actual stories and your username, but I don't think it should be a shameful thing to have done it and participated in it at all.
There's also people grow. Again, just to keep using this particular fic as an example, the author of this, like, you know, she did come out and say to stop talking to the actual people. She also had other fics. Like, I could be completely wrong because I didn't delve super hard into this side of the fandom, but I'm sure her fic was like the fic of this fandom. And I think for that reason, a lot of people had read her other ones. And her other ones went into stuff like, again, if you're an avid fan fiction reader, you know, of like the Omegaverse and things like that. She went into stuff like that. She wrote slightly more problematic AUs that like she didn't intend to write them problematically, but like as the years went on, she actually deleted them and she gave explanations as to why she had written them at the time. She understood why they weren't kind of okay anymore. She apologized to anyone that she had offended with them or upset or like had caused any kind of damage with them. And yeah, I think, like I said, it just kind of shows people of the fan fiction era growing up. And like, I know fan fiction isn't over, and maybe this is just us again being of an age that we are, but obviously fan fiction as we experienced it is over. Not that I want to go back into that whole shameful side of it, but even people hiding it, like I said, added that intimacy that doesn't exist anymore. It's definitely a lot more about community now, which I think is fantastic. But there is just something about 2 a.m. in the morning being completely on your own in pitch black with that screen lighting up your face and being like just completely involved in this world.
It's so brilliant. It's just like such a different experience to reading just generic published fiction. Like, and it's very much a case of if you know, you know. You know?
Yeah.
It's really you had to be there, honestly.
You can't, like I said, you really can't explain it. Like I said, if you're watching this or listening to this now and you have no fucking clue why we wanted to do this, thanks for sticking around, but this wasn't for you. You know, this is for the people that were there, like probably people mostly of our age, maybe a little bit younger or older. It was a feeling and experience you can't really summarize, and we just wanted to have a fangirl moment and address it.
I mean, there are a million other things we could have spoken about, like super hulock and stuff, but they're completely massive topics which I'm not, you know, comfortable with making a dent in. But I'm aware that loads of people talk about this stuff still to this day. So if people have recommendations for, say, people who comment on this stuff or video essayists or other creators, then I'd love to hear it, because this is a topic I do not feel like is discussed. And also, very much.
This is also like like we've always said this about like the white noise area in general, like our social medias and the comment section. Like, this is a completely safe space. Like, we don't condone any shaming or anything like that. So like if you wanted to come to a space to share like, oh, this fanfic really had an impact on me, even if now you absolutely hate it and you'll never touch it again, but it had a moment in history for you, then like let us know, because we want to hear it.
Oh yeah, we want an open forum over on Twitter. So definitely let us know. But thank you very much for listening. If you got this far, I really enjoyed this episode. Honestly, I'm gonna say I think it's been my favorite so far.
We were both so excited for this one, and like you said, we could have gone on for a long time. We could have got more specific. I mean, if people wanted to hear more, we could do it. I mean, we're very kind of like if and or on it, because like I said, we don't want to then like draw attention to the wrong things, but you know, there's so much there's so much positivity in fanfic that people overlook because they don't get it. And it's like, if you don't get it, then just fuck off. Like, we don't
like, why don't I want to hear it?
Like, literally, if you don't like it and you don't get it, that's fine, but just like go do whatever you like doing then.
Screw you, be gone. Honestly. Thank you so much for listening, watching, however you consumed this. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and remember to subscribe
on our Twitter and the YouTube video and everything. All that jazz.
Well, we are not used to doing these call outs at the end, but I really hope you enjoyed, and that's it from us today. So bye.
See you next time. Bye.